Like this? Just talk.
You don't have to use it. You can just put it here as well. Or you could.
Testing. Great. All right. Hello, everyone. So, in this regard, the focus itself for the research that we have been working on is looking at the use of immersive tools as part of the architectural education applications, and it is a ongoing framework that is fully developing as well, looking at the pedagogical framework for integrating virtual reality as the main design tool and into a fully virtualized design studio environment. So in this case, we take a moment to remember our undergraduate experience. Most of us have been through a very similar approach where we look at the trends that were taking place back then at that point in time and looking at what trends were taking place during that period. During this experience, we reflect on the tools utilized and what emerging technology took precedent in our education. May that be when Revit was popular, when AutoCAD or Grasshopper was popular. And in this regard, we notice that architecture continues to push the boundaries in design and innovation through utilizing new emerging tools such as VR, XR, Unity, game development. And for this one, we look at the world of XR as the main focus in this research. The tools have gained prominence in the past decade, ranging from consumer-friendly tools like augmented reality, which is currently used in social media quite a lot, to virtual reality and mixed reality tools used in gaming and social networking platforms. Is this an echo or is it fine? Yeah? Okay. A bit too close? Better? Okay, thank you. So in this case, the accessibility is the key factor that drives this research. Through using consumer available hardware and software that is utilized in our development methodology, we make sure that most of the tools that are there are accessible for the students after education or also to integrate into their personal projects. We focus on the expansion of conventional tools and translating this process into the virtual environment through utilizing XR and additional XR tool-based products. So in this case, you have the 360 photography, which was initially produced and available through using iPhone or Android applications, but now you also have 360 cameras, which are also available as well. We look into adding that into the site analysis approach. Things similar to 3D scanning, for example, photogrammetry and 3D scanning built into LiDAR scanners in iPhones, iPhone Pros and onwards are also available to most consumers these days. In addition to classic texture captures as well in 2D format. The additional approach is to also utilize the immersive design aspect of 3D sketching and to enable the students to also embrace the virtual space at a one-to-one form. The second is to look at the collaboration aspect. How do we learn from that approach? We went through the pandemic period and being able to go through remote practice and look at the education experience. Most of it was on long distance. You were not able to see the face, for example, and that limitation we wanted to kind of bypass by looking at the one-to-one virtual avatar, enabling students to also collaborate and work with the tutor or the lecturer remotely. In addition to that, finally looking at the potential of using gaming applications and game engine systems to develop more refining processes to allow the students to develop their own virtual environments. So in this case, this is a very simple example looking at the breakdown of it, starting off with a very simple sketch, which is the conventional example, looking at how we can translate that using a traditional 3D software, which is the main platform at the moment, and then also looking at the ability to do this a lot faster using a 3D sketching tool. In this case, we had the research questions, which focused on how the development of a pedagogical framework for incorporating virtual reality as the main design tool in a fully virtualized architectural design studio, and also to measure the effectiveness of this. Now, it is a new approach that we try to implement to make sure that we are, first of all, applying this in an educational framework, but also to see how effective it also performs. So the aims for this was to develop the methodology itself based on previous experiences and previous literature that focused on the utilization of virtual environments, may that be a desktop software or a VR software. And in this case, to incorporate multiple digital 3D exercises that are derived from manually driven conventional techniques, and then to also test this framework during a full semester project, which goes under the name of Immersive Design and Collaboration, which is a design studio unit that also ran in parallel to non-virtualized design studios, and that's where part of the comparison takes place. So part of the literature itself was broken down into different categories. Number one being the virtual reality and design applications. Number two was architectural education itself. And number three, the applications of Unity and different game engines that were integrated to use as evaluation systems. So this category then was then broken down into a flowchart and an overlap of the different categories and seeing how they also relate to each other, being the idea of spatial one-to-one preview, which merged both Unity and 3D modeling, the idea of building testing via simulation and animation using Unity and 3D modeling, and also interactive systems, which allowed the students to work at a one-to-one scale. The breakdown itself was then formulated into the methodology itself, which then led into the breakdown of the framework. Now, the framework itself, once again, looking at the classical approaches, looked at the collage development being the traditional exercise, which was then transformed into 3D. We had the free-form finding exercise, which was traditionally done in physical models, but now translated into 3D modeling in VR. 3D bubble diagramming, also in context. 3D function boxes and 3D scanning elements to create the designs. The outputs themselves were various. Now, in this case, we started off with a very small number of students, and then with every single iteration, we plan to increase the number as to make sure that the introduction that we provide is as refined and as of good quality as possible, starting off with 3 students, doubling up to 6, 12, and onwards in the upcoming future, hopefully. So, looking at the 3D collage development exercises, you can see some of the examples taken, including the 2D textures, the 3D scans taken using the LiDAR scanner applied on iPhones, and also the 360 photography, which was also applied using the Insta360 device. Some of the outcomes you can see from that data on the right side, where some of the students were able to create their own 3D collage in VR, where they were able to basically apply texture and create different designs. And in this case, the idea itself was for them to also embrace the site itself. We had a one-to-one scale site also applied in VR, where they were able to also experiment with the collage itself, and hence they were able to get a better contextual understanding of the space itself. The site, on a side note, was actually an island called Hilbre Islands, located in West Kirby in Liverpool. It's a remote island actually located as a design project site. Very freeform, allowed the students to also create and enjoy and embrace the freedom of creating, multiple designs. And here we also then move forward towards the volumetric approach, where the students then looked at being able to apply these exercises, may that be, let's say, cross-iteration to duplicate, or let's say trace forming as well, using the site as an inspiration as well, and then refining and iterating that design one-to-one up until the final approach. Every single one of those included the students, as you can see here. These are the virtual avatars of the students creating, and this is actually their work. And the whole project itself would take place in VR, where I would also be able to enter the room with them, and we basically have the virtual studio there. The second approach was, as I mentioned before, actually incorporating the site itself and using that as a point of inspiration to highlight and trace form certain areas of terrain that might have inspired the design itself, replicating that to create new forms. And then also to create the volumetric and zoning exercise to also understand how the building also functions. So the study itself focuses on the first initial stages of the design process, but also can go into the refinement, where the students were either able to look into external software, so there was no limitation into just sticking with VR. They were also able to export their software, their models into their preferred modeling software to further refine the model if required. So these are also other examples that were applied with the process, where students were also built directly on the site itself. And hence, once again, the direct one-to-one scale understanding of the site provided the students with a lot more of a contextual relation back into the site, instead of being limited to the 2D platform. And that's where many of the students actually provided a more of an interesting perspective. The second point was also the limitation. Some students preferred to also draw in 2D instead of 3D, and hence they were also able to take a picture of the 2D pictures and actually upload them into the virtual studio and actually use those as points of inspiration to trace on top of and also replicate to create their designs even further into 3D. The survey itself was then also applied to get a certain perspective and to also understand and get more insight on their experience as well. And that was basically used as a form to also understand whether they found it effective, whether it helped them or not, and to gauge exactly how they would like it to be in the future. And that basically fed back into the methodology to further implement it and make it more efficient for the students to embrace as well. The idea itself was looking at the efficiency aspect. How do we make it as accessible as possible, and to how to make it as applicable as possible in design and practice platforms. And this is where we try to make sure that the students have the tool set enabled to expand upon what they initially know. Overall, we look at the system outcomes, and we look at the methodology itself, and we try to make sure that we take this as an expansive part where it loops back. We receive feedback, and we improve the methodology itself. This concludes the presentation. I hope that this gave you further insight on VR applications. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation and questions, please.
First of all, thank you very much, Mohammed, for a beautiful presentation. And
Thank you.
good to hear that you had much more to say. It was very fast and very informative and a lot of information. So maybe I missed it because you said, or the context was COVID. But did you manage to implement it during the COVID time, or it was reflected after COVID that you need such tools to be able to work remotely as well?
In this case, this took place after COVID. The initial application itself took place in 2022 in October. That was, yes. So in this case, we took also some inspiration as well. But the remote learning, experience basically carried forth from the COVID pandemic period.
And the second question is because you said tutors and students, so I guess that students were excited, sometimes annoyed, probably because of the technology and so cloud files, big files, etc. But probably they were into it. But what about tutors?
So,
Everyone is into technology, or
so in this case, once that's the part of the primary focus is to look at accessibility as well. In this case, looking at consumer available products as well that were also user friendly and also intuitive as well. Hence why we picked the software Gravity Sketch, which was also it enabled a certain tool set itself, but all the interactions were available there. We provided a very quick briefing, and most briefings usually took about 1 to 2 weeks to introduce the students to the tools themselves and to also experiment and apply the methodology throughout the process and semester. So this also applied to the tutors where they were able to experiment with it for, let's say, the summer and then apply it during the semester itself. So they can be debriefed prior.
Next year, and then Henrik, please.
Thank you for this presentation. It was very interesting to see this wide exploration of VR tools. I wonder, you mentioned that you had a comparison with traditional non-immersive studio. So I didn't see, or maybe I missed the results, the comparison results. Can you say something about the outputs, the learning outputs in comparison for non-immersive studio?
So in this case, that was one of the comparative aspects. The primary one that we focused on is to look at the students' previous background as well. The students that were applying this methodology included the MA students, which previously also all partook the BA applications as well. All of them went through the initial applications of understanding that they went through the traditional approach, and all of them have not used VR in the past, which turned out to be a coincidence. And from that approach, we then allowed them to also compare how much it added to that approach. So once again, we questioned, how effective did you find this tool? How was this tool actually adding to your tool set? We don't want to replace any existing tool sets. We want to add and expand upon it and give you the option to explore different sets. One belief that I try to go by is that softwares have various outputs. In this case, whether someone uses 3ds Max or SketchUp, a software will always give you a various output. And that's where something like VR could provide a whole different output that we would like to also fully explore and test out the outcomes of.
So there was no control.
May I answer the part of it? Because I think what is coming is that
Yes.
The projects will be evaluated by the external examiner, which hasn't arrived yet. So these reports of the external examiner will be part of this comparison, because the three studios basically work in parallel. And then obviously there's the marks. So we're going to look at this, but he doesn't have the data yet because they're not completed. So it's going to graduating now, because it's a years-long course. So by November, this data, marks, external examiner reports, and also the moderation reports will be basically comparing the outputs of the different studios.
Well, this is very interesting because to follow, to do these follow-ups, I mean,
But it's very essential.
Now,
yes, it's essential.
kindly ask, unfortunately, I have to say that please continue discussion during the coffee break because we have still three presentations to